Hey, thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. Let's get to it. This time, I'm going to be working on a couple of different things. I'm going to start with mounting the T-slot on the side of the deck, and I'll show you how I'm isolating it. Unfortunately, I'll be showing you how I fix a little bit of a screw-up that I've made. I'll also tell you a little bit about the science behind the corrosion between aluminum and steel, and how to avoid it. So let's get to work and see what happens. Previously, I've talked about how we want to isolate the aluminum from the steel to stop the aluminum from corroding. And I could get into this way too deeply, but basically what happens is when we have steel in direct contact with aluminum and we get some liquid in there that's capable of conducting electricity, like salt water or even dirty water, we get a difference in voltage that naturally occurs between the aluminum and the steel. And when we get this difference in voltage, that difference in voltage is like a battery and it allows a current to flow. What happens is the electrons in the aluminum leave and go to the steel, and since electrons hold the world together, when the aluminum loses its electrons, it starts to fall apart. And that's very basically how we get corrosion. So what we want to do is one of two things. Either break the electrical contact in between the aluminum and the steel so the electrons can't flow, or prevent the liquid from getting in the area where that contact is. Now you can also use both methods if you so choose, isolate and seal, and this way if one of the methods fails, like whatever you're using to keep the water out doesn't actually keep the water out, you still have the isolation. Now in general, electricity is not going to travel through plastic, so what I'm using is small pieces of this thin cutting board that I've cut up to match the size and shape of the areas that I want to isolate. This is the same cutting board material I used to isolate the aluminum ECU from the steel mounting structure. It's cheap, easy to fit, and durable. To help make the installation of this 13-foot long piece of T-slot easier, I've clamped a support angle to the front and rear arms so I can use both hands to assemble it. I've also pre-installed all of the T-slot nuts in the interface of the extrusion. This is going to help me line things up with the edge of the steel structure. I'm only installing the hardware loosely. I want to keep everything loose until all of the fasteners are in and aligned, and then I can tighten everything up. In goes the plastic, and in go the bolts. Keep in mind, all of this assembly is temporary, it's just for fitting up. All of this has to come apart again before the steel can get painted. With all of the hardware snugged up, it's time to move on to the next step. Now unfortunately, what I've discovered after putting the T-slot on the two sides and laying all the deck boards out is in fact my entire deck has a bit of a dish to it. And that's because the way that I welded the box tube together didn't quite come out as I planned, and I really should have sequenced it slightly differently. So what's happened is when I've welded the top of the box tube to the side box tubes to the fore aft box tubes, they've actually lifted the outer edges a bit, and I had the large piece of steel channel on there, but unfortunately that wasn't enough. So now I'm going to have to straighten it out, push the sides of this very heavy box tube back down about 1/8 of an inch on each side, I think, and then weld my gussets in. The reality is I should have welded the gussets in place before I put the weld on the top, and that would have held everything square. So learn your lesson from me. Don't do it the way that I did. Now luckily for me, I have a lot of oddball steel around, and that's about 1.5 inches thick and about 3 inches high, so it's pretty stiff. And you can see at the edge here, it's touching, and as we go across, the gap gets quite large. Across the center, stays large, and then comes back down to nothing. So what I need to do is press down in the middle of this, which is going to push the two sides down, and then weld the gusset in place and keep it there. I guess we've reached the moment of truth. Time to take the clamps off and see if it stays straight. That looks better. Now, as you can see, I've got a bunch more of those to do, so I'm going to stop filming and get at it. Well, there we go, folks. I've got the gussets welded to all of the frames. I've got all the frames straightened out, so we're pretty much good to start laying the deck down. I do have one more frame to stiffen at the very front. It's going to be a little different. That's a video for next time, so stick around, hit subscribe, click that bell, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.